Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Julia.
And I'm Stephany.
And we're a mother and daughter who love reading and talking about books. The ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Mom.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good.
It's a blustery day outside.
It is.
We've just had a day of 75-degree temperatures, and even though it's blustery today, it's still pretty warm. But I think we're on the downward spiral, and we're heading back into more wintry weather, which I guess I'm glad for. I think I'm to the point now where I'm just ready for winter to be done, and let's just have spring.
I put a spring Spotify playlist together yesterday. I'm over it. I'm moving on. Let's just bring on the spring.
No more moping about no snow. We're just looking for daffodils and for the trees to bloom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way, I think.
Yeah.
I've given up.
Me too.
My hope is gone.
I'm so upset.
What do you have in your mug?
I am drinking one of your stash white peach oolong teas.
Very good.
I haven't tasted it yet. It's still quite hot. I'm very particular about the temperatures that I put in my mouth, but it smells good.
Yeah, it does. So, I can smell it from here.
Yeah. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking, I think you say Tazo or Tazo Refresh Mint Tea.
Okay.
It's non-caffeinated, which is really the only thing I was looking for this afternoon. And this is also light and refreshing, and it smells good. So it's giving me a little bit of pep for this podcast discussion. Speaking of which, today we are going to be talking about a few books that are related to time. Speculative fiction in particular, so time travel, time loops or time slips, and then just briefly touching on immortality. And the way that we came to this topic is kind of roundabout, so just bear with me as I explain how we got here. February is leap year month when it's leap year, but it isn't leap year this month. Even though it's not a leap year this year, there is still a quarter of a day that is hanging out somewhere in the nether regions. And that's what made us think of science fiction and time travel. Leap year was designed by Julius Caesar to account for the time that was missing in the calendar. He already knew that that was happening. It also had to do with aligning the holidays in the Roman calendar so that they happened in the same seasons every year. But his mathematician, Sosigenes, I hope that's how you say his name.
I don't think he'd be offended if you didn't.
Right, came up with the idea of adding a day to Februarius, which was their month of February, every 4 years to account for this missing time. Then in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII decided that the every 4 years should happen on even-numbered years that could be divided by 4. And that is how we got leap years as they are today. In researching leap year for this podcast, I came across something interesting that I never knew. So I thought I would share it with you, Julia, and with our listeners.
Share it with the class.
There is something called a century leap year. And that means...
Makes my eyes want to go cross-eyed.
If the start of a new century is also a leap year, then you can only do the leap year if the year number can be divided by 4. So 1600 was a leap century year, and 2000 was a century leap year. I think I said that wrong. It's century leap year.
Sure.
So all the first years in a century if they had a leap year in them, they couldn't be a leap year unless that year could be divided by 4. So yeah, it gets really complicated. So since the time that this whole idea was settled with Pope Gregory, we've only had 2 century leap years, 1600 and the year 2000.
I'm just going to live my life. And if leap years happen around me, great.
Okay. But you see how complicated this is? This is actually what science fiction time travel can feel like sometimes when you're reading about it. So we're already getting into it. We haven't even gotten into our topic yet.
There's a quote I feel I need to put in here because it matches perfectly. I'm struggling to comprehend this.
Yes.
And as we were putting together this script, I was a Doctor Who fan in high school. Yes. And there's a quote here that he says that I feel like it just needs to be said.
Bring it.
He says, people assume that time is a strict progression from cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. And I feel that's appropriate in this mess of leap years.
Okay, well, that's where we are. We're going to be talking about wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff today.
I love it. Let's do it.
Time travel falls within the umbrella label of speculative fiction. Mm-hmm. And speculative fiction is just a term to describe any type of fiction that it deals with topics outside of reality. It deals with topics that you find in reality as well. And a lot of authors use speculative fiction to really delve deep into the human condition and philosophy, but they do it outside of what we would consider the realm of reality. So to give you an example of speculative fiction, horror is speculative fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, any kind of utopian or dystopian fiction is speculative fiction, and science fiction is speculative fiction. Time travel tends to fall in science fiction, speculative fiction.
Right.
So I think that's a good enough explanation for us to get started. Today's chapter is going to be basically a book recommendations episode. We are going to just discuss some of our own experiences with time travel books. We've only picked books we've really enjoyed. I read a lot of time travel, but I'm only bringing a few books today. If this is a topic that we really enjoy, we could even break this down further and do specific chapters focusing on time travel, time slips, immortality, and even some other things related to crazy time.
Messing with time, or slowing time down, or things like that.
Right. What we're going to do is break our time travel episode into 3 separate categories. We're going to talk about straight up time travel, either forward in time or backward in time. Then we're going to talk about time loops. And the easiest way for me to explain this is to just say Groundhog Day, where just like the movie, the characters keep repeating a certain sequence of events over and over again until they get it right, whatever they're supposed to be getting right to move on. Then the third topic or category of time travel that we're going to look at is not specifically time travel, but immortality. People who can't die, people who maybe can die, but they live extremely long lives before they do. So those are the 3 topics we're going to talk about today. And I am just going to pass the baton to you, Julia, and we're going to do straight up time travel. And you can go ahead with your first recommendation.
Sure. So I'm just going to kind of preface this. My books are all over the reader timeline. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of the books that I read are messy time. So they either slow down time or deal with time in different ways than what fall into these categories. So I have other recommendations, I promise, within these categories. We spread the reading timeline.
Right, yeah.
The first one for time travel that I'm going to pick is a major throwback for anybody who is my age, and that is the Magic Treehouse books by Mary Pope Osbourne.
They are middle grade.
Yes.
Are they middle grade or are they younger kid books?
I think they're younger kids because they're pretty thin.
They're thin and they're easy, quick reading. Yeah.
Yes. There's not very many chapters in them. I remember specifically reading these in early elementary school versus later elementary school. I was also, I was reading like Jane Eyre in 6th grade. Yeah. So maybe I'm not the best judge of what a good category is.
But I remember reading these to you and your brothers when you were in elementary school and Aaron was preschool. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Just kind of a general synopsis for these stories. It centers around Jack and Annie, who are brother and sister, and they somehow discover a treehouse. It's not on their property. It's in the woods somewhere. And they get into this treehouse, and it takes them on wild adventures in time. It's mostly back in time, but it can also transport them to other countries, other places, other cultures, other worlds. There's one where they're on the moon.
Yeah.
The first couple of books that I remember predominantly, they're back at the time of the dinosaurs, and then they're in ancient Egypt, and then they're seeing knights in medieval, I think they're in England at that point. So just a really easy introduction into history, even historical fiction, science fiction. I would say that the Magic Treehouse books are the historical Magic School Bus.
Yes.
So Magic School Bus is more science-based. These are more history-based. That definitely dates me. That's fine. However, these were just really enjoyable to read when I was younger and a good toe dipper into historical fiction.
Right. And I can say, having read these books as an adult, because I read them to you and Mark and Aaron, your brothers, they are very fast-paced. There's a lot of drama. Some of them are very high stakes.
Yeah.
I mean, there is life and death situations going on. And I, even as an adult, enjoyed that. I felt like the pacing was good. The writing was good. They were very engaging. So, I mean, as an adult, I would not pick those up for myself, but I definitely enjoyed them as I was reading them to you.
Right. Yeah. I would put these books on the same level as, and I don't have the author in front of me, but of like My Father's Dragon.
Yeah.
Of books that I would reread for a nostalgia kick instead of I'm sitting down to read this for a true reading experience.
Right. And each book can be read in probably an hour.
Minutes.
10 minutes.
Well, probably not. I'm definitely underestimating. I'm an awful judge of time and distance and things, but it's a short read. It's a very short thing. What is your first one, Mom?
I am purposely staying away from the well-known time travel books like Outlander or The Time Traveler's Wife. And even The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I'm going to stay away from those, and I'm going to pick and choose some lesser known, for the most part, books. And the first book that I want to talk about is a book called What the Wind Knows by Amy Harmon. And this is a book about a woman who travels back to 1920s Ireland. And at that time, Ireland is teetering on the edge of a war with England. And this woman happens to do this time traveling because her grandfather has died, and he has requested that she take his ashes to Ireland, to this specific lake, and scatter his ashes there. And when she steps into the lake, she time travels back. And the story goes from there. This is a love story. It's also historical fiction. Very well written. The characters are just very, very real, complex. You care about them. And I was just so engaged in the history of Ireland, all that was happening at that time, which I knew nothing about. I'm just going to read my Goodreads note to give you an idea of what I was thinking of when I finished the book. I wrote, a great time travel book with a fascinating peek at 1920s Irish history. I was engaged from the beginning and fell in love with the setting, the storyline, and the characters. I can't help myself. I love a bit of fantasy, especially when it's mingled with believable real-world stuff. So that was my synopsis after I finished reading the book. I had never heard of Amy Harmon before, but she is... I don't know why she's not more popular. I think she's a great writer, and this story was just fantastic. I loved it.
And I'm a sucker for time travel into England and Scotland and Ireland. And
yeah, and this is a complicated one. Very complicated, because when she goes back in time, and I want to be careful that I don't spoil anything, she is mistaken for a family member that lived during that time and is related to some other people that she runs into. So it's extremely complicated in that way, and just very, very interesting. So this is a book I recommend if you like historical fiction, if you're interested in a little bit of romance, and if you like the concept of time travel and some of the complications that can arise from that. This is a good one.
Yeah. It sounds like it would be a heartbreaker too.
There are you're talking about very difficult times in Ireland. Yeah. There's some difficult things happening for sure. What is your next time travel book that you want to talk about, Julia?
This book I feel like I'm cheating a little bit on because I read it not as long ago as The Magic Treehouse, but I read it once and then got rid of it pretty quickly. Okay. So I don't remember it as clearly. But this is Ruby Red by Kerstin Gier. It's translated by Anthea Bell. So it originally is in German.
So this is a translated book from German.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to read the blurb off of Goodreads just to make sure that I do this story justice, because I remember the premise, but not enough to spitball it.
Yeah.
So 16-year-old Gwen lives with her extended and rather eccentric family in an exclusive London neighborhood. In spite of her ancestors' peculiar history, she's had a relatively normal life so far. The time-traveling gene that runs like a secret thread through the female half of the family is supposed to have skipped over Gwen, so she hasn't been introduced to the mysteries and can spend her time hanging out with her best friend, Leslie. It comes as an unwelcome surprise when she starts taking sudden, uncontrolled leaps into the past. And I remember this book specifically because it was like Time Travel Spy.
Okay.
So you were in different periods of time having to do certain things. I remember specifically a really frantic costume maker in this society of people trying to get everybody's costumes together for all of their different assignments. I liked the idea of there being this time travel secret agency spy, because that just sounded so cool. Like, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
I read this book. So you made us do workbooks for so many years when we were in school.
I did in the summertime.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We fought it tooth and nail. So I think one year you finally just gave up and said, you have to read one book and make me a PowerPoint on it. And this was the book that I read for that.
Yeah.
So there's a PowerPoint floating around somewhere, and who knows in what's it's on the internet.
In the ether.
Yeah. But this is the book that I did. And so maybe that's why I don't remember it, because I read it out of spite because I had to do this PowerPoint thing.
I'm sure it was not a trial for you, Julia.
No, it wasn't. And it is part of a series, but I remember not being, like, I wasn't as invested in the rest of the series. But it was definitely a fun little book to read for the summer.
And would you say this is YA?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, because there is definitive love interesty stuff that happens.
Did you feel like there was a lot of that angst that you often see in YA? Maybe you can't really articulate because you read it when you were a teenager.
At the time it matched my reading voice, but looking back and reading the blurb, so I didn't include half of the blurb on here
because you didn't want to spoil it.
Well, it felt like a teenager, and it just was not my kind of thing anymore. So it's not a story that I would go back and read now, because I'm not interested in stories that feel like they're speaking from a 17-year-old voice. But I think if you are somebody in that age range, this would probably fit perfectly into what you're looking for.
Or if you're an adult reader who really enjoys YA, because I know there are many, many, many adults who enjoy reading YA, and in particular, young adult fantasy and science fiction. Yeah, this could easily be something they would enjoy.
Yeah.
The whole time travel for spy and adventure, that sounds really cool to me.
Yeah. And I could be getting it wrong. It might not be spy. It might be something else. But I remember this.
Just the secret society.
Something that they had tasks and missions that they had to do. So
that sounds like a time travel book that I would like to read. It's called Just One Damn Thing After Another. And it is about historians who go back in history to experience the events that they're investigating. And things happen.
I want that job.
Yeah. Bad things happen all the time.
Well, okay, I don't want the bad things, but I want that job.
The thing about this series, from what I understand, is it's campy. Like they get in messes, but it's fun. So I would like to read that. But it sounds kind of similar to what you're talking about as far as being in a secret society and traveling through time. And
And truth be told, now maybe not from the YA perspective, but if this was a show on Netflix, oh my gosh, I would gobble it up whole.
Right.
Because I would love that.
Yes. Yeah. Sounds like that would be a great show to watch.
Yeah. An easy binger.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here thinking that my time travel in my reading almost always goes backward. Yeah. It's always historically focused. Yeah. I can't think of a book I've ever read that traveled forward in time. So I think I need to do some investigation and find some books. I know The Time Machine goes forward in time by The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Yeah. And I would like to read that. I have not read it, but I know that goes forward in time.
Yeah.
I think Planet of the Apes does too.
I don't know. I haven't read any of those yet, so I don't know.
Anyway, that was kind of a little aside. My second book is an oldie but a goodie. And like you, I read this quite a while ago, but I'm bringing it to the show today because I think it needs to be resurrected and more people need to read it. This is a different type of time travel, and I think it's closer to the time travel that your Ruby Red book is highlighting, in that this is not a person stepping through standing stones or walking into a lake and time traveling. This time travel is happening because the author believes in reincarnation. I mean, she doesn't believe in it, but she's using reincarnation as the impetus for time travel.
The point of the story.
Right. Yeah. In that reincarnation also allows all your former lives to remain in your DNA or in your genetic makeup so that you can experience your former lives. And what happens in this story is there is an American woman who marries an Englishman and she goes to live in England with him. But in the process of doing that, they move to a place that is very close to where they both lived together in a past life. And because of that, it kind of sends her into this catatonic state because their past lives together were not good. Bad things happen. And the story is called Green Darkness. It's by Anya Seton. And the woman goes into this catatonic state, and she's reliving her former life. And she meets her husband in her former life. This former life takes place in Tudor England, which...
Hey, that's my time.
I know that's your time in history. Anya Seton, in her author time, is like the 1940s, 1950s. She was known to be a very meticulous researcher of history.
Okay.
And her books are very historically sound and very detailed and very interesting. So in this story, when you're in the 1500s, it's just so engaging, and it's a very tumultuous time. It's a very dangerous time. And this story is very high stakes, very dramatic. I really enjoyed it. It was a long time ago that I read it, though, and I don't have all the details. But I just remember it feeling very tense, very, very dramatic, very high stakes. I recommend Anya Seton as an author anyway. She wrote one of my favorite books of all time that I have never talked about here on the show, and that is Catherine. But this book in particular focuses very much on a time travel theme. Even though the person isn't traveling back through time, she's experiencing a former time in a very real way.
That sounds so good.
Yeah, it is very good.
I think if I hadn't just read a historical fiction, I don't think I would be as interested in it because I'm still reading all of my dark fantasies too. But now that I have finished said historical fiction, I might need to pick that one up next.
So that's Green Darkness by Anya Seton.
Sign me up.
Okay, so we have talked about time travel, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some time loops. Julia, do you have a book you want to talk about?
I do. My Groundhog's Day, my time loop book is a doozy. It's a fabulous book. I loved it. Holy heckin'. It's a doozy. So this is the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Now, you will sometimes see it as 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Kind of just depends. I believe it's the American version that is 7.5. So just putting that out there in case you're looking it up and you get confused. It's there. I think the easiest way to kind of describe this is it's Groundhog's Day meets Agatha Christie with the dash of Doctor Who.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can without giving stuff away. Our main character wakes up one day in a body that is not his, in a place he doesn't recognize, and is trying to figure out what the heck is happening. Next thing he knows, somebody dies, and he goes to sleep, and he wakes up the next day and he's in another body that he doesn't recognize, but in the same place. And throughout the process, he discovers that he has so many chances to figure out who kills this person, the woman, Evelyn Hardcastle, that's the title, while also recognizing that he has 7 different hosts or 7 different bodies that he's in, with each a unique ability to solve the mystery. But at this point, it's day 3 or 4, and he's already used so many hosts. So
till he even figured that out. Okay.
Right. At the end, you literally just have to hang on for dear life because stuff is just unfolding really fast. This is a phenomenal book. It is so much fun. I gave up trying to figure it out at about chapter 2 because I just was along for the ride.
Yeah, I think you have to be for this book. Just strap in and hang on.
Yes. This is written by Stuart Turton. I apologize. I should have said that earlier. I was just a little too excited to talk about it. But his writing keeps you hanging on. He's a fabulously fun writer, and he writes things in a way that you just are so unsure about every single little thing until he ties it up at the end. I highly recommend this if you're looking for a good Groundhog's Day that's not Groundhog's Day.
Yeah, I've read this too, and I second everything you said. I just remember feeling completely exhausted when I was done reading that. It was such a ride. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mentioned in the last chapter that I don't like books that make me paranoid. This book made me paranoid, but not in the kind of messing with my mind kind of a thing. It's paranoid as in I need to figure out what's going on. I need to... how's everything going to work out? Yeah. So it's a different level of how it kind of takes over your thought process.
Yeah, it's a crazy, crazy book.
Yeah. I would even say, now we didn't grow up playing Clue, but if you've played Clue, I think there's some level of that in here as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely a Clue feeling mixed in there.
Fabulous story. Please read it. Which one are you going to talk about?
My Groundhog Day time loop book is probably the most well-known book maybe in this list, next to Evelyn Hardcastle, the 7.5 Lives of Evelyn Hardcastle. And I want to talk about Recursion by Blake Crouch. And this book is definitely a Groundhog Day type of book, but it's not days that are repeating. It is years. Years and years of a person's life keep coming back around so that they can make so that they can make changes in what is happening. And I can't give much away about this, but a scientist develops a way for people to revisit memories that are special to them. But this tool falls into the wrong hands, and it's starting to wipe people's memories away. I'm pretty sure that's the best way to explain this. Okay. And if you can imagine, it is wreaking havoc. And the woman who is the inventor tries to make it right. And that's what this story is. But it involves traveling back in time over and over and over again. it doesn't, I don't know how to make this sound better, but it's so propulsive and you're so invested in this being made right, the bad things that are happening. And the two main characters, plus there's a bad guy. It's just a very interesting interplay between the three of them and everything that's going on. I remember I listened to this on audio. The narrator, I will put his name in the show notes, but he did such a good job. I remember cleaning the bathroom, listening to this, and I think I was cleaning the shower at Mach 10 because I was so worked up and just so involved in the story, and it was just so intense. So
that poor shower.
That's Recursion by Blake Crouch. He also wrote another book that I wouldn't say is so much time travel as a play on interrelated realities, but it had the same type of feel. If you've ever watched the movie Inception, this book has that feel of like layer into layer into layer into layer.
Cool. So what I'm hearing is much like the movie Inception, I'm going to have to read this book 3 or 4 times to understand what's going on.
I don't know if that's the case, but you won't be able to explain it after only reading it one time. Like I've only read it once and I'm doing a horrible job of explaining it.
Okay. Noted.
Okay. Our last topic is immortality. And I think we're just going to talk, each of us talk about one book.
Sure.
So what is your immortality book, Julia?
My immortality book is Ever by Gail Carson Levine.
Oh, I love Gail Carson Levine. She's a great writer.
I read a lot of her books growing up. I would say maybe most of her more popular, her retelling of fairy tale. She did a lot of like The Princess and the Pea or things like that. Things that were shorter stories. Yeah. I didn't read many of those. I read a lot of her more serious fairy tales.
She's the author of Ella Enchanted and Ferris.
Yes.
And
2 Princesses of Bamar.
Yes.
And I know that there's 1 or 2 others. And I do not have Ferris, but I have pretty much everything else that we just listed.
Okay.
This story is, I think this is the first one that I felt the magnanimity of death. That's so morbid.
Do you mean like the heaviness?
Yeah.
Okay.
But let me read kind of the breakdown here. And this is, again, right off of Goodreads because I wanted to make sure that I did it justice. It has been a while since I've read it, but I remember the feel of this story. So falling in love is never easy, but falling in love with an immortal god while your days on earth are numbered is almost more than a young girl can bear. In this story, Gail Carson Levine has created a stunning new world of flawed gods, unbreakable vows, and ancient omens. Keza, or Keza, however you want to say it, is our main character, and she is confronted with a terrible destiny. In an attempt to thwart her fate, she and her love, Olis, the god of wind and loneliness, embark on a series of dangerous and seemingly impossible quests.
And this is to gain her immortality?
It is a conversation of how far are you willing to go to be with the person you love.
Forever?
Yes.
Okay.
Not so much in she's not doing it to be immortal, she's doing it to be with him, and means
he's immortal.
Yes.
Okay, following.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's some very sad events that happen at the beginning of the book, and I can't say them because I can't.
Spoilers, yeah.
Yes. And I remember feeling what those events were deeply and sad. I would say that if you are somebody who's very sensitive to things like that, maybe hold off on this book. There are some pretty mythological events that happen, they meet gods and do big god mythological things, in this quest to obtain her life. And then there's this overarching pressure of that if this quest fails, she is unable to be with him. Okay. And then there's no other option. So
lots of high stakes.
Very high stakes. Fabulously done. If you have read Gail Carson Levine, you know that she does myths and fairy tales and things like that, and just slightly gothic, highly decadent, wonderful storytelling. But I think this is one of the best examples that at least I have on my shelves at the moment for immortality.
Yeah, I don't remember ever hearing about that book by her, so I might have to pick it up. March is Is that a middle grade or is that young adult?
I think most of her stuff does border middle grade. The topics might be more young adult, but it is definitely middle grade.
It's middle grade March coming up, obviously, in March. And I might have to pick that one up just to experience that that story.
Well, I have it if you want to borrow it.
Okay. My last book is not very well known, I don't think. And that's why I'm bringing it here to the show today. It is called Tomorrow. It's by Damien Dibben. And it is the story of a dog who is immortal because his master made him immortal. And for most of the story, he is trying to get back to his master. They've been separated because of a certain event, and he is trying to find his master again. The reason I love this book so much, it's told from the perspective of the dog. The dog is very wise. He's good. He loves his master, but not just his master. He takes care of the people that he runs into, both animal and human. And you follow him through many decades. So that's the fun part of this book, is it's a historical book, but you're seeing it through the eyes of an immortal dog. And his master is also immortal. And their immortality comes from a science experiment.
Oh.
So it's just a very interesting concept. You get the story of the dog and the master, and then, of course, there's a bad guy.
Oh, sure.
So you have to add some tension to the story. The reason that I think maybe this book is not as popular as I think it should be, because it's an excellent story, is that it is slow. It is not a fast-paced book. It's much more reflective and philosophical than plot-based, and that will probably not appeal to a lot of people. But I really loved it. It goes from it's mostly based in Europe. It's all based in Europe, but you're in England, you're in Belgium, you're in Spain, I think, you're in France, and you just follow the dog through true historical events as he's looking for his master. It's a very good book, but like I said, a little bit slower pace, so it won't appeal to everybody. Very well written, though. And I'm going to read my Goodreads thoughts after this book as well. I wrote, "This is an unexpected and fascinating story that I lingered over. The dog, Tomorrow, is the narrator, and it's his perspective through which the tale is told. Absolutely unique story, striking characters, human and animal, well-wrought settings with historical accuracy, and excellent writing. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I would highly recommend as long as fast-paced action is not a reader requirement. It's a contemplative book about life, mortality, and purpose. And the narrator for the audiobook is excellent." So yeah, I forgot. I listened to this on audio. So I will put the narrator in the show notes, but very, very, very good. It's long. It's a long book, but it was good.
Books with animals as narrators always hit my heart different. So like The Art of Racing in the Rain.
Yes.
I probably was a little too young when I read that book. But I just remember that making my heart feel a little funny.
Pulls on your heartstrings in a different way.
Yeah.
And this dog obviously loves his master.
Oh, and I just want to cry sitting here. But all of these places that you just listed just are, fabulous. Fabulous.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time in history. And you're, like I said, you're seeing all of the events play out through Tomorrow's eyes and perspective. Tomorrow is the dog. Yeah. So that is a little taste of what time travel and time loops and immortality can be like in a fictional book, in a speculative fiction setting.
Yes. We would be so curious if any of you have read any of these books.
What you thought.
What books would you put in these categories?
Yeah.
Let us know your thoughts on those. And then if you're interested, we can definitely do more time-specific chapters.
Yeah, I have a ton of books. I really, really, really had to edit down my list because I could have talked about many, many books.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's just a testament to how we read and how much we read and the topics we like to read about.
And the fact that I think time travel in particular is a very popular science fiction theme.
Yeah. I mean, time itself, I finished The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and that didn't necessarily deal with time travel. It messed with time. And so I think there's a lot of that we could include in the conversation as well I mean, Narnia is a good example of going to Narnia and coming back and not much time has passed. So all of these could be added to the conversation at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, as we're closing out, we have, do we call this exciting news, exciting plans, exciting
plans?
Yes. Yeah. In our plan for the podcast, we knew that we wanted to have guests on the show. This was something that we knew very early on, and we're very excited about it. The way that we've structured to do this is we're going to have one every quarter.
Yes.
And we're getting ready for our first guest.
Yes.
Now we're going to keep some of it still secret and still surprised. But the way that we're going to do this is we're calling it 3 Peas in a Pod. Mm-hmm. And we have decided that we're going to ask the guest to pick a book for the 3 of us to read and then talk about.
Yes.
So I know that when we started the podcast, we said this is not a book club podcast, and it's still not.
It's not.
This is a chance for us to be able to talk with another reader in our family or friends or somebody else about a book that they really like and have those conversations together. So our first guest has requested that we read The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell.
Yes.
If this is something that you would like to do with us, please read this book, and then we can have fabulous discussions at the time of that chapter.
And you then will be able to join in, not in the discussion necessarily, but you will know about the book, and you will be able to consider your own thoughts and feelings based on the discussion we're having.
Yes. In this, as well as a kind of a heads up to you, is we're going to be looking at the call pile rating system. Now, we are going to include it in our show notes, but simply the call pile looks at the characters, the atmosphere, writing, plot, the intrigue, logic, and then overall enjoyment. And again, we'll kind of break some more of that. We'll break that more down in that exact chapter as we prep for that conversation as well. But we wanted to give you a heads up of what we're looking at, so then you can have this conversation with us.
Yeah. And we're using the call pile rating system more as like a structure for how we talk about the book. Not necessarily that we're all going to rate it specifically, but maybe we'll decide we want to do that too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Just for some structure. So just to tie things up here at the end, we are starting a new series, 3 Peas in a Pod, which is dropping on March 22nd, in which we will be talking about The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell with a special guest. This will be a very spoilery, dense episode. So if you're not looking to read the book or don't want anything spoiled, catch us in the next chapter. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us, and we'd love for you to join us in the next chapter.
We'd love for you to continue today's conversation with us at the Booksnug_podcast on Instagram and at the Booksnug Podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.budsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, so famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me," and we wholeheartedly agree.